Lost and shivering, the little alien girls slept in ruins. A human carried them home in his arms. The acrid smell of twisted metal and pulverized concrete hung in Ryder Thorne's nostrils as he maneuvered his waste reclamation crawler through the debris field. 3 days since the seismic event had collapsed an entire residential sector, and he was still pulling fragments of people's lives from the rubble. A child's toy here, a family portrait there, each piece a reminder of how quickly everything could disappear. "Easy, Zephyr," he murmured to the sleek gray cat perched on his shoulder, its cybernetic collar blinking with environmental readings. The modified feline was more than a companion. Its enhanced senses could detect gas leaks, structural weaknesses, and other hazards that kept Ryder alive in dangerous salvage zones. Suddenly, Zephyr's ears flattened against its skull, and the collar shifted from green to amber. The cat leaped down, padding purposefully toward a collapsed archway where twisted support beams created a small cavity. Its whiskers twitched as it sniffed the air. Then it turned back to Ryder with an urgent chirp. "What is it, buddy?" Ryder shut down the crawler's engine and grabbed his portable scanner. The readings made his blood freeze. 2 faint life signs, barely registering. Human-sized but with unusual thermal patterns. His gut clenched. After 6 years cleaning up after disasters, he knew what dying looked like on his instruments. He squeezed through the gap, emergency light cutting through the darkness. What he found stopped him cold. 2 small figures huddled together in the deepest part of the shelter, their pale blue skin almost translucent with cold. Alien children. Girls, he thought, maybe 8 or 9 years old in human terms. Their delicate features were slack with unconsciousness, silvery hair matted with dust and debris. They wore simple tunics that had once been white, now torn and filthy. Most heartbreaking of all, even in their unconscious state, they clung to each other desperately, as if their embrace was the only thing keeping them anchored to life. Ryder's chest tightened. The image crashed into memories he'd spent 3 years trying to bury. His sister Maya's children, trapped under factory machinery while he'd been powerless to reach them. He'd lost everyone that day. His sister, his nephew, his niece, the only family he'd had left. "Not again," he whispered, his voice raw. "I won't lose anyone else." The regulations were clear. Civilians weren't supposed to handle alien casualties without proper authorization, but these kids would be dead by the time he followed protocol. Zephyr mewed softly, pressing against his leg as if sensing his emotional turmoil. Ryder shed his jacket and wrapped it around the nearest girl, feeling how cold her skin was through the fabric. The other child stirred slightly when he lifted her sister, making a soft sound of distress. Their bond was so strong that even unconsciousness couldn't break it. "It's okay," he said gently, though they couldn't hear him. "I've got you both." Carrying them was awkward. They were lighter than human children, but longer-limbed, and he had to keep their heads supported while navigating the treacherous rubble. Every step was careful, deliberate. One stumble could kill them all. Back at his crawler, he activated the emergency shelter protocols he'd learned during industrial accident training. The vehicle's rear compartment converted into a basic medical bay, complete with thermal regulators and hydration systems. As he worked to stabilize their body temperature, Zephyr jumped onto the medical platform, curling up between the girls to share its warmth. That's when it happened. The first girl's eyes fluttered open, large, luminous violet orbs that seemed to hold flecks of starlight. When her gaze found his face, her skin began to emit a soft, pearl-white glow. The light pulsed gently, like a slow heartbeat, and wherever it touched his equipment, small scratches and dents began to smooth away. "Incredible," he breathed, watching his scanner's cracked display screen repair itself under her touch. The second girl awakened moments later, her own bioluminescence joining her sister's. Together, their combined light filled the small space with an otherworldly beauty. They looked at him with wonder rather than fear, as if recognizing something in his actions that transcended species barriers. "Safe," the first girl whispered in accented but clear standard. You made us safe. Ryder felt something crack open in his chest. Not the sharp pain of old wounds, but something warmer. Something that had been locked away since the factory explosion. For the first time in 3 years, his protective instincts weren't just about guilt and survivor's remorse. These children needed him, and he had the power to help them. "That's right," he said softly, adjusting their thermal blankets. "You're safe now." Zephyr purred contentedly as both girls reached out to stroke its fur, their bioluminescence making the cat's gray coat shimmer like silk. The environmental readings on its collar had shifted to peaceful green, confirming what Ryder already knew in his heart. These weren't just random victims of the seismic event. There was something special about them, something that called to the deepest part of his nature, the part that had once been a protective older brother before tragedy stripped that role away from him. As he initiated emergency medical protocols and sent out a carefully worded report that would bring help without triggering immediate bureaucratic interference, Ryder made a silent promise. Whatever these children were, wherever they came from, he would see them safely home. The emptiness that had hollowed him out after losing his family suddenly had a purpose again. The girls dozed fitfully against Zephyr's warmth, their soft breathing the only sound in the medical bay. But their bioluminescence continued to pulse gently, as if their bodies were slowly healing from whatever ordeal had left them unconscious in the ruins. Ryder began preparing nutrient solutions and running diagnostic scans, falling back on emergency protocols he'd learned during his worst days in industrial cleanup. He had work to do, and for the first time in years, that work felt like more than just surviving until tomorrow. It felt like hope. The next 18 hours blurred together in a rhythm of careful tending and quiet discovery. Ryder had converted his small apartment's living space into a recovery area, with Zephyr serving as a furry heating pad who never left the girls' sides. The cat seemed to understand their needs instinctively, purring whenever they showed signs of distress and gently nudging them awake when they needed hydration. "Kira," the first girl had said, touching her chest with a slender finger. Then, indicating her sister, "Naya." Their names were like musical notes, flowing with an elegance that made standards sound clunky by comparison. Ryder learned through patient questions and simple gestures that they were twins, that they'd been separated from their matriarch during the seismic event, and that they possessed some kind of biorestoration ability that seemed tied to their emotional state. When they were calm and comfortable, their touch could repair minor damage to organic and synthetic materials alike. When they were distressed, the ability flickered and faded. "Your mother?" he asked gently, showing them a standard diplomatic identification chart on his datapad. "Is your matriarch your mother?" Kira nodded solemnly. "Matriarch Lyrian. She speaks for our people with yours. Then, with the devastating honesty of childhood, she will think we are dead." That statement hit Ryder like a physical blow. He remembered the desperate search efforts after the factory explosion, the way hope had curdled into grief as hours stretched into days. No parent should have to endure that uncertainty. "We'll find her," he promised, though he had no idea how. "Your mother will know you're safe." What he hadn't expected was for her to find them first. The pounding on his door came at dawn on the second day, sharp and authoritative. Zephyr's ears went flat, and both girls scrambled behind Ryder's chair, their bioluminescence flickering with fear. "Ryder Thorne," a voice called through the door, speaking standard with a melodic accent that reminded him of wind chimes. "You will open this barrier immediately. I know my daughters are within." Ryder's stomach dropped. Diplomatic immunity meant alien officials could pretty much do whatever they wanted on the colony, and his unauthorized care of the girls could be construed as kidnapping under the wrong circumstances. But when he looked at Kira and Naya's frightened faces, his protective instincts overrode his legal concerns. "It's okay," he told them quietly. "That's your mother's voice, isn't it?" Kira nodded, but neither girl moved from behind his chair. Something about their body language suggested this reunion might be more complicated than he'd assumed. The door chimed with an override code, and it slid open to reveal a woman who took Ryder's breath away. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, with the same pale blue skin as her daughters, but more angular features that spoke of maturity and authority. Her silver hair was elaborately braided with metallic threads that caught the morning light, and she wore formal diplomatic robes that somehow managed to be both elegant and practical. Behind her stood 2 security officers in form-fitting armor, their hands resting casually on what looked like energy weapons. "Ambassador Lyrian Stellawind," the woman announced, her violet eyes scanning the room until they found her daughters. The transformation in her face was immediate and startling, diplomatic composure cracking to reveal raw maternal relief. "Kira, Naya." The girls emerged from behind Ryder's chair, but their approach was hesitant. When their mother knelt and opened her arms, they ran to her. But Ryder noticed they kept glancing back at him as if seeking reassurance. "My heart lights," Lyrian whispered, holding them close. Her own bioluminescence activated, a warmer golden glow that complemented her daughter's pearl-white radiance. For a moment, the 3 of them formed a constellation of living light that made Ryder's utilitarian apartment feel like a temple. Then Lyrian's attention turned to him, and her expression hardened back into diplomatic steel. "You will explain," she said, rising gracefully while keeping one hand on each daughter's shoulder, "why my children were not immediately returned to proper authorities upon discovery, and you will explain why you felt entitled to treat them without medical qualification or cultural consultation." The accusation stung because part of it was justified. Ryder had acted on instinct, not protocol. But looking at Kira and Naya, healthy, calm, clearly bonded to both him and Zephyr, he couldn't bring himself to regret his choices. "They were dying," he said simply. "Hypothermia, dehydration, maybe internal injuries. By the time I'd gone through proper channels, they'd have been gone." "So you appointed yourself their guardian?" How convenient for someone seeking to establish leverage over a diplomatic family. That accusation hit harder because it was completely wrong. Ryder felt his temper flare, not at the insult to himself, but at the suggestion that he'd exploit vulnerable children for political gain. "Lady, I don't give a damn about your diplomatic status," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I found 2 kids who needed help, and I helped them." "That's it. That's the whole story." Lyrian's eyebrows rose at his bluntness, but before she could respond, Kira stepped forward. "Matriarch," the girl said formally, "this human gave us safety when we had none. His companion creatures shared warmth when we were cold. He sang to us when we were afraid of the dark." She looked back at Ryder with something approaching hero worship. "He is honorable." Naya nodded emphatically. "He has gentle hands, like father did, before the star sickness took him." The mention of their father created a moment of charged silence. Lyrian's expression softened slightly as she looked between her daughters and the gruff human who'd apparently earned their trust so completely. "You sang to them?" she asked, and for the first time her voice held curiosity instead of suspicion. Ryder felt heat rise in his cheeks. They had nightmares. Lullabies seemed to help. It was such a small thing, but somehow it seemed to matter enormously to Lyrian. She studied his face as if seeing him properly for the first time, taking in his work-worn hands, his practical clothing, the way Zephyr had positioned itself between him and her security officers as if prepared to defend him. "Show me," she said suddenly. "Show me how you cared for them." So Ryder did. He demonstrated the improvised medical setup, explained his reasoning for each treatment decision, showed her the nutrient solutions he'd prepared based on basic xenobiology texts he'd downloaded. Throughout his explanation, Kira and Naya added their own commentary, describing how safe they'd felt, how the pain had gradually faded, how his stories about Earth animals had helped them sleep. By the time he finished, Lyrian's hostility had transformed into something that looked almost like respect. "You have been more thorough than our own medical staff might have managed under similar circumstances," she admitted. And my daughters clearly feel secure with you. She paused, studying his face. Why? What motivated such care for strangers? The honest answer was too painful to share with a woman he'd just met. Instead, Ryder settled for a partial truth. Everyone deserves someone to look out for them, especially kids. But Lyrian's perceptive gaze suggested she heard the deeper story in what he didn't say. The loss, the guilt, the desperate need to matter to someone again. For reasons he couldn't quite name, that understanding didn't feel like weakness. It felt like the beginning of something unprecedented. Over the following week, an unusual routine developed. Lyrian would arrive each morning to spend time with her daughters, often staying for hours to observe their continued recovery. What had begun as diplomatic oversight gradually evolved into something more personal, as she witnessed Ryder's patient care and genuine affection for the girls. The breakthrough came when Kira's bioluminescent healing began manifesting in more dramatic ways. While playing with Zephyr, she'd accidentally knocked over Ryder's coffee cup, shattering the ceramic handle. Without thinking, she'd pressed her small hands against the broken pieces, and they'd fused back together seamlessly, not just repaired, but somehow improved, as if the break had never existed. Remarkable, Lyrian murmured, examining the restored cup. Their abilities are growing stronger under your care. In our medical facilities, they showed little improvement. Maybe they just needed to feel safe first, Ryder suggested, watching Naya successfully repair a crack in his apartment's wall panel. Trauma can suppress natural abilities, right? I've seen it with human kids after industrial accidents. Lyrian's violet eyes focused on him with new intensity. You understand trauma recovery? This is not typical knowledge for waste management personnel. The observation was gentle but probing. Ryder found himself sharing more than he'd intended. His experience as an emergency responder during the factory explosion, the children he'd helped evacuate, the ones he'd been too late to save. Lyrian listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed she truly understood the weight of survivors' guilt. In our culture, she said finally, we believe that those who have survived great loss are specially equipped to prevent future losses. Your instincts with my daughters, they arise from wisdom earned through pain. It was the most compassionate interpretation of his trauma that anyone had ever offered. Coming from someone of her obvious intelligence and cultural sophistication, it felt like absolution he hadn't realized he'd been seeking. Their growing mutual respect was interrupted by an emergency that would change everything. The crisis began with routine system alerts that escalated rapidly into full colony-wide panic. The water reclamation facility, which processed waste and recycled it into drinking water for 50,000 colonists, was experiencing cascading failures throughout its biofiltration network. The organic components that cleaned and purified the water were dying off faster than they could be replaced. All technical teams have failed to identify the core problem, Lyrian explained during an emergency briefing she'd been asked to attend as the senior alien diplomat. The contamination is spreading to backup systems. Without intervention, the colony will be uninhabitable within 72 hours. Ryder studied the technical readouts with growing recognition. He'd worked waste management for 6 years, and while he'd never dealt with anything this sophisticated, the basic principles were familiar. More importantly, he could see what the experts were missing. They're approaching this like an engineering problem, he said, pointing to the failed repair attempts. But it's actually a biological ecosystem collapse. The filtration bacteria aren't just dying. They're being poisoned by their own waste products because the system's balance is off. Lyrian frowned. The repair teams included xenobiologists and systems engineers with decades of experience. Sure, but they're thinking too complicated. Sometimes the simple answer is the right one. Ryder pulled up environmental data from his own waste processing experience. Look at these pH levels. The bacterial colonies need specific chemical conditions to thrive. The disaster probably shifted something fundamental, and everything downstream got corrupted. As he explained his theory, Lyrian's expression shifted from polite attention to genuine interest. His working-class perspective on industrial systems was revealing blind spots that advanced degrees had missed. "You believe you can repair what the experts cannot?" she asked. "Maybe, but I'd need help." He looked at Kira and Naya, who were playing quietly with Zephyr in the corner. "Your daughter's biorestoration abilities, if they could strengthen the healthy bacterial colonies while I reset the chemical balance." Lyrian's maternal protectiveness flared immediately. "Absolutely not. They are children, not tools for industrial repair." "I'm not asking them to be tools," Ryder said firmly. "I'm asking if they want to help save their home. But only if you think it's safe, and only with their consent." The distinction mattered to Lyrian. He could see it in the way her posture softened slightly. After a moment of consideration, she called the girls over and explained the situation in their native language, using terms they could understand. Kira's response was immediate and decisive. "We will help the humans who gave us shelter." Naya nodded eagerly. "Our light can make the tiny life forms strong again." Their willingness to contribute, combined with Ryder's practical solution, created an opportunity that transcended species barriers. For the first time since her daughter's rescue, Lyrian looked at him not as a convenient caretaker, but as a partner whose judgment she trusted. "If we do this," she said carefully, "we do it together. As a family unit." The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to address directly. But as they began planning the complex operation that would save the colony, Ryder felt something shift in their dynamic. The formal distance Lyrian had maintained was giving way to something warmer, more collaborative. Their first joint venture took them into the depths of the reclamation facility, where massive biotanks housed the failing bacterial colonies. The environment was harsh, hot, humid, and filled with chemical fumes that made breathing difficult. But working together, they began the delicate process of system restoration. Ryder's role was straightforward: neutralize the toxic buildup and rebalance the chemical environment. Years of waste management experience had taught him exactly which industrial solvents would clear contamination without damaging the bacterial substrate. The girls' contribution was more art than science. They would place their small hands on the tank walls, letting their bioluminescence penetrate the murky water, somehow identifying healthy bacterial colonies and strengthening them at the cellular level. Their abilities seemed almost intuitive, guided by some instinct that transcended scientific understanding. Lyrian coordinated between them, translating technical readouts and monitoring the girls' energy levels to prevent exhaustion. But more than that, she served as the emotional anchor that kept them all focused and calm during the high-pressure work. As hours passed and their success became apparent, Ryder found himself stealing glances at Lyrian's profile as she worked. Her intelligence was obvious, but so was her fierce devotion to her daughters and her growing respect for his practical abilities. When she caught him looking and smiled, really smiled, not the diplomatic expression she wore in public, he felt his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. By the time they emerged from the facility, the bacterial colonies were stabilizing and clean water was flowing again throughout the colony. 50,000 people would wake up tomorrow with fresh water to drink, entirely because of their combined efforts. "We make an effective team," Lyrian said as they walked back toward his apartment, the girls chattering excitedly about their adventure while Zephyr purred from Naya's arms. "Yeah," Ryder agreed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "We do." The acknowledgement felt like more than professional recognition. It felt like the foundation of something deeper, something that could grow into the kind of partnership he'd never dared to imagine possible. For the first time since losing his family, Ryder allowed himself to hope that loneliness might not be his permanent condition. The celebration of their water system success lasted exactly 18 hours before the next crisis struck, and this one was deliberately engineered. Ryder woke to emergency sirens and his communication device buzzing with priority alerts. The reclamation facility was experiencing another catastrophic failure, but the readings made no sense. Systems they'd just repaired were showing impossible contamination levels, as if someone had introduced massive amounts of toxic material directly into the clean water supply. "It's sabotage," Lyrian said grimly when she arrived with her daughters and a security detail. Her diplomatic composure was strained with barely controlled anger. "Someone wants the colony to fail, and they're using our success against us." The situation was worse than simple vandalism. According to the emergency reports, the contamination wasn't just killing the bacterial colonies, it was creating a toxic cascade that would spread throughout the entire water distribution network. Every tap, every shower, every drinking fountain would become a poison delivery system. "Who would do this?" Ryder demanded, studying the sabotage patterns. "And why?" "Political enemies who oppose human-alien cooperation," Lyrian explained tersely. "There are factions on both sides who benefit from keeping our species separate and distrustful. Our successful collaboration threatens their power structures." Kira and Naya pressed close to their mother, sensing the adults' fear and tension. But when Ryder knelt to their level, both girls looked at him with the same determined expression they'd worn during the repair work. "The little life forms are crying," Kira said softly, touching the datapad that showed bacterial die-off rates. "They hurt very much." "We can help them," Naya added with quiet confidence. "But the poison makers will try to stop us." Their matter-of-fact acceptance of danger made Ryder's chest tighten with protective fury. These children had already survived one disaster that nearly killed them. The idea that someone would deliberately create another crisis, knowing it would harm innocents, made him angrier than he'd been since losing his own family. "Not if I stop them first," he said grimly. The sabotage had been sophisticated but not perfect. Ryder's waste management experience let him trace the contamination source to a specific injection point in the facility's main processing center. But reaching that location would require navigating through areas where the toxic fumes were concentrated enough to kill an unprotected human within minutes. "The security teams have tried," Lyrian reported after consulting with her officers. "The contamination levels are beyond safe exposure limits. Even with full environmental suits, they couldn't maintain consciousness long enough to reach the source." "Then we do it different," Ryder said, his mind racing through possibilities. "Zephyr's environmental sensors can navigate toxic conditions, right? And if the girls can strengthen the healthy bacteria while I neutralize the poison source?" "Absolutely not," Lyrian said flatly. "I will not risk my daughter's lives on such a dangerous plan." But Kira stepped forward, her young face set with determination that reminded Ryder powerfully of her mother. "Matriarch, the poison makers want us to be afraid. They want humans and our people to blame each other instead of working together." She looked up at Ryder with absolute trust. "But he taught us that family protects family, no matter what." The word family hit Ryder like a physical blow. In less than 2 weeks, these remarkable children had somehow adopted him as completely as he'd claimed them. The realization was terrifying and wonderful and utterly transformative. "If we're family," he said quietly, "then we protect each other. That means I go into the dangerous areas, and you two stay safe with your mother." "No," Naya said with surprising firmness. "Our light can make you safe too. We can make the poison not hurt you." It was Lyrian who recognized the possibility first. "Biorestoration," she murmured, understanding lighting her features. "They might be able to neutralize toxins in real time, creating a protective field around you." The plan was insane, dangerous, and completely dependent on abilities they didn't fully understand. It also represented their only chance of stopping the sabotage before the contamination spread beyond containment. Zephyr led the way through the facility's twisted maintenance corridors, its enhanced sensors guiding them through pockets of poisoned air toward the contamination source. Ryder wore a basic respirator, but his primary protection came from the girls walking beside him, their bioluminescence creating a bubble of purified atmosphere that neutralized toxins before they could reach his lungs. The effect was extraordinary. Where their light touched contaminated surfaces, the corruption seemed to drain away like water. Pipes cleared, air filters restored themselves, and even the emergency lighting grew brighter as damaged systems repaired themselves. But the closer they got to the sabotage point, the stronger the contamination became, and the harder the girls had to work to maintain their protective field. Ryder could see exhaustion beginning to show in their faces, their bioluminescence flickering with effort. "Almost there," he promised them, checking Zephyr's readings. "Just a little further." The contamination source turned out to be a sophisticated chemical injection system that someone had illegally installed in the facility's main processing hub. It was designed to look like legitimate equipment, which explained how the saboteurs had avoided detection during installation. Neutralizing it required Ryder to manually disconnect multiple chemical feeds while simultaneously purging the toxic reservoir, all while wearing thick protective gloves that made fine manipulation nearly impossible. Worse, the saboteurs had included security measures. Tampering with the wrong component would trigger a massive release of concentrated poison that would kill everyone in the facility. "I can't see the connection points clearly," Ryder muttered, sweat fogging his respirator as he worked by feel. "The protective gear is too bulky." Without hesitation, Kira and Naya stepped closer, intensifying their bioluminescence until the entire chamber was filled with pearl-white radiance. The light didn't just illuminate the equipment. It seemed to highlight the critical components, making the safe disconnection points glow brighter than the dangerous ones. "There," Kira whispered, pointing to a specific coupling. "That one first." Her guidance was perfect. Following the girls' intuitive understanding of the system, Ryder systematically dismantled the sabotage equipment and purged the poison reservoir. Each successful disconnection made the facility's emergency alerts fade until finally, blessed silence returned. But their victory came at a cost. Both girls collapsed from exhaustion the moment the crisis passed, their bioluminescence fading to barely visible glimmers. Ryder caught them before they hit the contaminated floor, his heart hammering with fear that they'd pushed their abilities too far. "They'll be fine," Lyrian said, but her voice was tight with worry as she helped him carry her daughters to safety. "They're young. They recover quickly from ability strain." As they emerged from the toxic facility, Ryder realized that something fundamental had changed between them. Lyrian's gaze held a warmth and trust that transcended diplomatic courtesy. They'd literally trusted each other with their children's lives, and that bond couldn't be dismissed or rationalized away. "Thank you," she said softly as they waited for medical clearance. "For saving them. For saving all of us." "We did it together," Ryder replied, meaning it completely. "All of us." The distinction mattered, because it acknowledged what they'd all begun to understand. They weren't just temporary allies anymore. They were a family, forged by crisis and sealed by the absolute trust that comes from facing danger side by side. As Kira and Naya dozed in the medical bay, recovering their strength, Lyrian's hand found Ryder's and squeezed gently. The gesture was small, but it felt like a promise of something permanent and precious. Something worth fighting for. The formal recognition ceremony took place 3 weeks later in the colony's central plaza, with representatives from both human and alien governments in attendance. What had begun as a routine diplomatic acknowledgement had grown into something unprecedented, the first joint citizenship ceremony in colonial history. Ryder stood at the podium in clothes that still felt foreign, formal diplomatic attire that Lyrian had insisted was appropriate for the occasion. Beside him, Kira and Naya wore traditional alien ceremonial robes that sparkled with embedded bioluminescent threads, their excitement barely contained as they watched the gathering crowd. "Citizens of Haven Colony," the human administrator began, his voice carrying across the plaza through amplification systems. "Today we recognize extraordinary service that has saved 50,000 lives and established new possibilities for interspecies cooperation." The official citations were read aloud. Ryder's innovative approach to system restoration, the girls' unique contributions to bioremediation, Lyrian's diplomatic leadership in coordinating the response. but the words felt inadequate to capture what had really happened, how a chance rescue had evolved into a family bond that transcended species barriers. When Lyrian stepped forward to speak on behalf of the alien delegation, her formal diplomatic tone couldn't completely hide the personal warmth in her voice. The humans have a saying, actions speak louder than words. Ryder Thorne's actions spoke of compassion, competence, and courage. His willingness to risk everything for unknown children, to protect the vulnerable regardless of personal cost, embodies the highest ideals of both our species. She paused, her violet eyes finding his across the ceremonial space. Therefore, by the authority vested in me by the Stellar Confederation Council, I grant Ryder Thorne full citizenship in our society, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. Additionally, recognizing his proven dedication to the welfare of Kira and Naya Stellawind, I formally acknowledge his paternal bond and grant him co-guardianship rights equal to my own. The legal language was dry, but its implications were revolutionary. Ryder was now officially part of an alien noble family with legal standing that made him one of the most politically influential humans in the colony. More importantly, Kira and Naya were legally his daughters as well as Lyrian's. But the most significant moment came when the girls themselves stepped forward. In our culture, Kira announced in her clear musical voice, family bonds are sealed by the sharing of light. She and Naya joined hands, their bioluminescence beginning to pulse in perfect synchronization. We share our light with the human who carried us home when we were lost and afraid. The pearl-white radiance that emanated from the girls expanded to encompass both Ryder and Lyrian, creating a column of living light that was visible throughout the plaza. But this wasn't just ceremonial. Ryder could feel something changing in his cellular structure, a subtle transformation that he somehow knew was permanent. What did they do? He asked Lyrian quietly, marveling at the warm, tingling sensation spreading through his body. Genetic integration, she explained, her own skin glowing with the same radiance. You're still human, but now you can understand our language instinctively, see in our light spectra, and, she smiled, live as long as we do. The girls have given you the physical capacity to truly be part of our family for centuries to come. The magnitude of the gift was overwhelming. They'd literally altered his biology to ensure he could stay with them forever. It was the ultimate expression of love and acceptance, and it left him speechless with gratitude. The ceremony concluded with the announcement of new policies that grew directly from their crisis response success. The colony would establish permanent human-alien technical cooperation teams, with Ryder serving as the first director of interspecies industrial problem-solving. Similar programs would be implemented on other worlds, using their methods as a template for broader cooperation. But perhaps most importantly, their story had already begun inspiring similar partnerships throughout the colonial territories. Reports were coming in of other human-alien families forming, other communities discovering that species differences were less important than shared values and mutual support. That evening, as the public celebrations wound down, Ryder found himself in his apartment, now officially expanded to accommodate his new family, watching Kira and Naya play with Zephyr in the living space. The cat had taken to their permanent presence with typical feline pragmatism, claiming the best sunny spots while graciously allowing the girls to provide chin scratches on demand. "Are you satisfied with your decision?" Lyrian asked, settling beside him on the couch with a grace that still took his breath away. "Permanent integration with our family means leaving your old life behind, completely." Ryder considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a lonely waste management worker with a traumatic past and no prospects for meaningful connection. Now he was the father of 2 remarkable children, partner to an extraordinary woman, and a key figure in interspecies diplomacy. The transformation was so complete, it felt like a different person's life. "I've never been more certain of anything," he said finally. "This feels like what I was meant for. What I've been moving toward my whole life without knowing it." Lyrian's smile was radiant with happiness and relief. Then we should discuss the bonding ceremony. In our culture, partnerships are formalized through... But her explanation was interrupted by Kira and Naya launching themselves onto the couch, demanding attention and affection with the shameless enthusiasm of children who knew they were completely loved. As Ryder gathered both girls into his arms, feeling their warm weight settle against his chest while Zephyr claimed his lap with typical feline entitlement, he realized that this moment, this perfect, chaotic, loving moment, was worth every trauma that had led him here. The factory explosion that had stolen his first family had also given him the experience and empathy needed to save his second one. "Papa Ryder," Naya said sleepily, the title coming naturally despite their short time together. "Will you sing the Earth song about the animals again?" "Of course, sweetheart," he replied, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. As his voice filled the apartment with gentle melodies about creatures from a distant world, Lyrian's hand found his free one and squeezed gently. Her touch carried the promise of formal bonding ceremonies and legal partnerships, but also something deeper, the absolute certainty that they'd built something permanent and precious together. Outside their windows, Haven Colony continued its daily rhythms, 50,000 people living and working in safety, because of the family bond that had started with 2 lost children and a gruff man who couldn't bear to leave them behind. Their story was already spreading to other worlds, inspiring similar partnerships and proving that the strongest foundations for cooperation weren't built on treaties or trade agreements, but on the simple recognition that all children deserved protection, all families deserved support, and all beings deserved the chance to find where they truly belonged. In the weeks and months that followed, Ryder's new role as Director of Interspecies Industrial Cooperation would take their family to different colonies, different worlds, different challenges that required the unique combination of human ingenuity and alien abilities they'd discovered during the water crisis. Kira and Naya would grow into their powers under the guidance of parents who understood both the responsibility and the joy that came with extraordinary gifts. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of their home, they were simply a family. 2 children, 2 adults, and 1 very content cat, bound together by love that had transcended species barriers and transformed individual lives into something greater than the sum of its parts. The little alien girls who had once slept lost and shivering in ruins now dozed peacefully in the arms of the human who had carried them home. And in carrying them to safety, he had found his own way back to the warmth and purpose that made life worth living. It was exactly the ending all of them deserved.